Heavenly Father, I pray for everyone watching this video right now. May you bless them with peace, joy, and breakthroughs in their lives. Amen. Hello, my wonderful family. I am so glad and grateful to have you here with me today. Your support means the world, and I truly don't take it for granted. Before we dive into today's powerful story, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, drop a comment below to share your thoughts, and of course, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update from this channel. Pack your things and get out of my house. Tonight, the words hit Emma Patterson like physical blows, each syllable designed to destroy whatever remained of her hope. She stood in the marble foyer of the Ashford estate, still wearing her graduation cap, the gold tassel catching the light from the crystal chandelier that had never felt like hers anyway. Margaret Ashford's perfectly sculpted face showed no emotion as she delivered the final verdict on 23 years of Emma's life. You've embarrassed this family for the last time with your choice of companionship. Mom, please. The word felt foreign on Emma's tongue now. I graduated summa cum laude. I got into medical school. Doesn't that matter? Don't call me that. Margaret's voice could have frozen fire. And yes, your academic achievements matter. They matter enough that we've decided you're finally capable of surviving on your own. Charles Ashford emerged from his study, not bothering to look at Emma as he spoke. The trust fund we established for you has been dissolved. The credit cards are canceled. Your room will be needed for storage. Emma's hands trembled as the full weight of their words settled in. 23 years of walking on eggshells, of trying to earn the love that should have been freely given, all erased in a single conversation. Is this because of David? She whispered. Margaret's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Your little boyfriend who works at that, what is it, community center? Who drives that ancient car and wears clothes from discount stores. Yes, Emma. This is absolutely about him. He's kind. He's intelligent. He makes me happy. He's beneath you, Charles interjected, finally meeting her eyes. Or rather, beneath what you could have been if you'd listened to us about proper associations. The cruelest part was how calm they were, as if they were discussing the weather rather than severing every connection that had defined Emma's existence. She thought of David waiting for her at the graduation party, probably wondering why she'd disappeared so suddenly. He'd been so proud of her today, his face lighting up when her name was called for academic honors. You raised me, Emma said, her voice barely audible. You're my family. We gave you opportunities, Margaret corrected. Expensive opportunities. Private schools, tutoring, connections. And you've repaid us by choosing to associate with mediocrity. Emma reached into her purse with shaking fingers, pulling out her house key and placing it on the marble side table. The soft clink echoed in the silence. I'll need tonight to pack. You have 2 hours. Charles was already walking away. Security will escort you out if you're not gone by then. As Emma climbed the stairs to what had been her room for over 2 decades, her phone buzzed with a text from David. Everything okay? You disappeared from the party. I'm worried. She stared at the message, knowing she couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. He'd try to fix this somehow, and the last thing she wanted was for him to sacrifice anything for her. David had already given her more genuine love in 2 years than the Ashfords had managed in 23. Her reflection caught her in the mirror as she began pulling clothes from drawers. Dark hair that Margaret had always insisted she style more appropriately. Brown eyes that Charles had once said reminded him too much of her unfortunate origins. A face that had never quite belonged in family photographs, always slightly apart, always the adopted daughter rather than the real child. But David saw something different when he looked at her. He saw Emma, not the Ashford project or the charity case or the disappointment. Just Emma. Her phone rang. David's name on the screen. Hey, she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Emma, where are you? People are asking about you. Something came up at home. Family stuff. There was a pause. David knew her well enough to hear the lie. Do you want me to come over? No. The word came out too quickly. No, it's fine. I'll see you tomorrow, okay? Emma. His voice was gentle, patient. Whatever it is, we can handle it together. The kindness in his words nearly broke her resolve. David had always been like this, steady and supportive, never asking for more than she could give. Sometimes she wondered what he saw in her, especially when she compared his natural confidence to her constant need for approval. I know, she whispered. I love you. I love you too. Call me if you need anything. Anything at all. After ending the call, Emma sat on her bed, and let herself cry for exactly 5 minutes. Then she wiped her face, squared her shoulders, and began packing the only life she'd ever known into 2 suitcases. She had no idea that David was sitting in his car outside the Ashford estate, having followed her when she'd left the party so abruptly. She had no idea that he'd been making phone calls for the past hour, his voice carrying an authority that would have shocked her. And she definitely had no idea that in 12 hours, everything she thought she knew about her life was about to change forever. Emma's hands shook as she zipped the second suitcase, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence of her childhood bedroom. 23 years compressed into 2 bags. She paused at her desk, fingers hovering over a framed photo hidden behind her lamp, the only picture she had of her birth parents. The young couple smiled back at her from a hospital bed, her mother's face exhausted but radiant as she held newborn Emma. Her father's hand rested protectively on his wife's shoulder, both of them looking like they'd discovered the meaning of the universe in their daughter's tiny face. They died in a car accident when Emma was 6 months old, leaving her to bounce between foster homes until the Ashfords had chosen her as their charitable project when she was 3. A fresh start for all of us, Margaret had told the social worker back then, her voice honey-sweet in a way Emma had never heard directed at her since. The door creaked open without a knock. Victoria Ashford, Margaret and Charles's biological daughter, leaned against the doorframe with practiced elegance. At 25, Victoria had inherited her mother's sharp beauty and her father's calculating eyes. "So you're really doing this," Victoria said, examining her manicured nails. "Walking away from everything we've given you." Emma didn't look up from her packing. "I think you mean everything that's being taken away from me." "Same thing." Victoria stepped into the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "You know, I tried to warn Mom and Dad about your little boyfriend situation." "What do you mean?" Victoria's smile was razor-thin. "I mean, I've been keeping tabs on David Chin for months. Someone had to protect this family's interests." The casual admission hit Emma like ice water. "You've been spying on him?" "Research, darling. Did you really think we'd let you date someone without a thorough background check?" Victoria pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like a detailed dossier. David Chin, 26, works at the Riverside Community Center, drives a 2018 Honda Civic, rents a modest apartment downtown. Parents deceased, no significant assets, no political connections, no social value whatsoever. Each word was designed to diminish David, to make Emma feel foolish for loving someone Victoria saw as worthless. But instead of shame, Emma felt a surge of protective anger. He's a good man. Good doesn't pay for private jets or open doors to the right social circles. Victoria's voice carried the same dismissive tone their parents used. Good doesn't elevate a family's status or create profitable alliances. Is that what you think love is about? Profit margins and social climbing? Victoria laughed, the sound empty and brittle. Love is a luxury, Emma. One you can't afford anymore. She paused at the bedroom door. Although I have to admit, there was something odd about his background check. Emma's hands stilled on her clothes. What do you mean? Gaps. Inconsistencies. Like someone had carefully scrubbed certain details from public records. Victoria shrugged. Probably just sloppy paperwork. People like him don't usually have the resources for privacy protection. After Victoria left, Emma sat heavily on her bed, phone in hand. She scrolled through her text conversation with David, reading months of gentle good morning messages, encouraging words before her exams, silly jokes that had made her laugh during difficult days. In every message, she could hear his voice, warm, patient, genuine. David had appeared in her life 2 years ago like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She'd been volunteering at a literacy program, part of the character-building activities Margaret insisted upon, when he'd approached her about expanding the program to serve more families. His passion for helping others had drawn her in immediately, but it was his quiet strength that had made her fall in love. He never pushed her to talk about her family, never seemed bothered by her reluctance to bring him to Ashford events. When she'd finally introduced him to Margaret and Charles 6 months ago, he'd been polite and respectful despite their obvious disapproval. He'd held her hand as they'd walked back to his car afterward, not saying a word about Charles's condescending questions or Margaret's barely concealed hostility. "They'll come around," he'd said quietly. "Sometimes people need time to see what really matters." Emma had wanted to believe him then. Now, packing her life into suitcases, she realized David had been more optimistic about her family than she'd ever dared to be about herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from her college roommate, Jessica. Saw the family drama at graduation. You okay? Emma stared at the message, realizing that her public humiliation was probably already making rounds in their social circle. Jessica had been there when Margaret had cornered Emma after the ceremony, her voice just loud enough for nearby families to hear her disappointment about Emma's poor choices and misguided priorities. Before she could respond, another text came in, this one from David. I know you said you needed space tonight, but I'm bringing coffee and groceries by tomorrow morning. You don't have to face whatever this is alone. The kindness in his words made her chest tight with emotion. David didn't even know what had happened, but he was already positioning himself to help her through it. While Victoria had spent months digging into his background looking for reasons to destroy their relationship, David had spent that same time learning Emma's coffee preferences and remembering which foods made her feel better on difficult days. As Emma folded her last sweater, she found herself thinking about Victoria's strange comment about gaps in David's background check. In 2 years of dating, David had never been secretive exactly, but there were things he didn't talk about. His childhood, his family's history, the years before he'd started working at the community center. She'd always assumed it was grief. He'd told her early on that his parents had died when he was young, but now she wondered if there might be more to it. Her laptop chimed with an email notification. The sender made her blood run cold, Margaret Ashford, with the subject line Final Arrangements. Emma's finger hovered over the delete button, but morbid curiosity won. She opened the message to find a formal, legalistic document outlining the immediate termination of all financial support, the cancellation of her medical school tuition payments, and a requirement that she return any items purchased with family funds within 30 days. At the bottom, in Margaret's precise handwriting, was a handwritten note. This decision is final and non-negotiable. We hope this will motivate you to make better choices about your associations going forward. The Ashford name will not be tarnished by your continued poor judgment. Emma closed the laptop and looked around her room one last time. The walls that had never quite felt like home, the bed where she'd cried herself to sleep countless nights wondering why she couldn't earn her adoptive parents' love, the window where she'd stared out dreaming of a life where she belonged somewhere. Tomorrow she would have to tell David everything. Tomorrow she would have to figure out how to pay for medical school, how to find a place to live, how to build a life without the safety net she'd never realized she'd been taking for granted. But tonight, as she carried her suitcases down the marble staircase for the last time, Emma felt something unexpected alongside the grief and fear. Relief. For the first time in 23 years, she was free to discover who she really was without the Ashfords' constant disapproval shaping every choice. Free to love David without their judgment poisoning every moment of happiness. She had no idea that David was already 10 steps ahead of her, making arrangements that would ensure she never had to worry about money or security again. She had no idea that her humble boyfriend's gaps in his background weren't oversights. They were carefully maintained secrets that were about to explode into the open. And she definitely had no idea that Margaret Ashford had just made the biggest mistake of her meticulously calculated life. The motel room smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, laptop balanced on her knees, staring at her bank account balance. $847.23. After paying for 3 nights at the Riverside Inn, the only place she could afford without a credit check, she'd have enough left for maybe 2 weeks of food if she was careful. The medical school acceptance letter lay beside her, the words that had once filled her with pride now reading like a cruel joke. Tuition, $65,000 per year. Living expenses, $25,000 annually. Dreams, officially unaffordable. Her phone had been buzzing all morning with texts from David, each one more concerned than the last. Good morning, beautiful. Bringing coffee in an hour. Emma, I'm outside your house but no one's answering. Your car isn't here. Called the Ashfords. Margaret said you're no longer in residence. What's going on? Please call me. I'm worried. Emma knew she couldn't avoid him much longer. But how do you tell someone you love that you've been thrown away like garbage? How do you admit that the family you'd spent 23 years trying to please had decided you weren't worth keeping? A knock on the door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw David holding 2 coffee cups and a paper bag, his face creased with worry. He'd somehow tracked her down. She opened the door, and his relief was immediately replaced by shock as he took in her surroundings. Emma, what are you doing here? It's temporary. The lie felt hollow even to her. David stepped inside, setting the coffee and what smelled like fresh pastries on the small table. His eyes moved over the cramped space, the suitcases in the corner, the acceptance letter on the bed. They kicked you out. It wasn't a question. David had always been perceptive about people, able to read situations with an accuracy that sometimes startled her. It's fine. I can handle this. No. His voice carried a firmness she'd rarely heard from him. This isn't fine. This isn't acceptable. Emma sank onto the bed, finally letting the facade crumble. They dissolved my trust fund. Canceled my credit cards. Margaret said I was embarrassing the family by dating you. David went very still. They blamed our relationship? Victoria's been investigating you for months. Background checks, surveillance. She said there were gaps in your records, inconsistencies. Emma looked up at him, searching his face. David, is there something you haven't told me? For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, calculation, maybe fear. Then his expression softened back to the gentle concern she knew so well. The only thing that matters is that I love you. He sat beside her on the bed, taking her hands in his. And I'm not going to let you go through this alone. I can't ask you to support me. You work at a community center. You drive a Honda Civic. I won't be another burden in your life. David's smile was sad and knowing. Emma, you've never been a burden. You've been the best thing that's ever happened to me. Before she could respond, his phone rang. The ringtone was different from usual, urgent, authoritative. David glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor shifted. I have to take this. He stepped outside, but through the thin motel walls, Emma could hear fragments of conversation. Yes, sir. I understand the timeline. No, she doesn't know yet. The situation has escalated beyond what we anticipated. When he returned, his face was set in grim determination. Emma, I need you to pack your things. What? Why? There's something happening at the community center. Something that affects everyone we work with there. He was already moving, gathering her belongings with efficient precision. I can't explain everything right now, but I need you somewhere safe. David, you're scaring me. He stopped, taking her face in his hands. I know this doesn't make sense. I know you have questions, but I need you to trust me for the next few hours. Can you do that? There was something different in his voice, an undertone of authority that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the gentle man she knew. For the first time, Emma glimpsed the person Victoria's background check might have missed. What's happening at the center? The city's threatening to shut us down. Some kind of zoning violation that appeared overnight. Families are going to lose their childcare, their job training programs, their food assistance. David's jaw tightened. 43 families, Emma. Kids who won't have anywhere safe to go after school. Emma felt the familiar surge of protectiveness she always experienced when vulnerable people were threatened. We have to fight this. We are going to fight this. The certainty in his voice was absolute. But first, I need to make some calls. As they gathered her things, Emma's mind raced. The timing seemed too convenient. The day after her family disowned her for dating David, his community center was suddenly facing closure. Victoria's words echoed in her memory. Someone had to protect this family's interests. David, she said slowly, do you think this is connected to what happened with my family? He paused, a muscle in his jaw twitching. I think your family has underestimated a lot of things. What does that mean? Before he could answer, his phone rang again. This time, Emma caught a glimpse of the caller ID. White House Communications. David saw her expression and closed his eyes briefly. Emma, the White House is calling you. Her voice was barely a whisper. I can explain. The White House, David. As in the actual White House. He answered the phone, and this time his voice carried unmistakable command authority. Chin here. Yes, I've seen the reports. No, we move forward as planned. 30 minutes. Emma stared at him as he ended the call. The man standing before her looked the same kind eyes, same gentle hands, but everything else had shifted. The way he held himself, the tone of his voice, the confidence that seemed to radiate from him like heat. Who are you? She whispered. David, or whoever he really was, looked at her with an expression of infinite tenderness and regret. Someone who's been trying to protect you from a world you never asked to be part of. He reached for her hands again. Emma, what would you say if I told you that helping those 43 families wasn't just about making phone calls? I'd say I don't understand. What if I told you that the people trying to shut down the community center aren't just local officials, but part of a network that includes some very powerful families who don't like their authority challenged? Emma's heart began to race. Families like the Ashfords? Families exactly like the Ashfords. And what if I told you, he continued, his voice gentle but steady, that stopping them isn't going to require lawyers or petitions or city council meetings? Emma stared at him, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed beginning to click into place. What is it going to require? David's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and nodded to himself. A demonstration of power they can't ignore. Outside the motel window, Emma heard the distant sound of helicopter rotors. David checked his watch. Right on time. David, what's happening? He turned to her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw the full force of who he really was behind his carefully maintained facade. Emma Catherine Patterson, he said formally. Would you like to meet the President of the United States? The helicopter landed in the motel parking lot like something out of a fever dream. Emma watched through the window as men in dark suits emerged first, scanning the area with military precision. Then, impossibly, President James Harrison stepped out, his silver hair catching the morning sunlight. This isn't real, Emma whispered, gripping David's arm. This can't be real. David's hand covered hers, steady and warm. Emma, I need you to know that everything I've told you about my feelings for you, everything between us, that's the only real thing in my life. Before she could process what he meant, there was a knock at the door. David opened it to reveal two Secret Service agents. Mr. Chen, the President is ready to see you both. Emma's legs felt like water as David guided her outside. President Harrison smiled warmly as they approached, extending his hand to her. Ms. Patterson, I've heard so much about you. David speaks of you constantly. Mr. President, Emma managed, her voice barely functional. I don't understand what's happening. I imagine you don't. Walk with me? The President gestured toward a quieter area of the parking lot, Secret Service agents maintaining a discreet perimeter. David stayed close to Emma's side, his presence both comforting and increasingly mysterious. Ms. Patterson, what do you know about your boyfriend's work? Emma glanced at David, who nodded encouragingly. He runs programs at the Riverside Community Center. Literacy, job training, childcare. And how did you meet? I was volunteering there. He approached me about expanding the literacy program. President Harrison smiled. That sounds like David. Always thinking about how to help more people. He paused, studying her face. What would you say if I told you that the community center is one of 47 similar operations across the country, all designed to provide services that government bureaucracy couldn't deliver efficiently? Emma's head was spinning. I'd say that sounds like a wonderful program. It is. And what would you say if I told you that David doesn't just run the Riverside Center, but coordinates the entire national network? David shifted beside her, and Emma caught a glimpse of something that looked like regret in his eyes. That would be impressive, she said slowly. It would indeed. The President's expression grew more serious. Ms. Patterson, this morning we received intelligence that several wealthy families have been systematically targeting these community centers through zoning violations, health code complaints, and other bureaucratic harassment. The goal appears to be shutting down services to vulnerable populations. Emma felt ice forming in her stomach. Families like the Ashfords? Families exactly like the Ashfords. Meanwhile, 15 miles away, Margaret Ashford was having the worst morning of her meticulously controlled life. She stood in Charles's study, staring at her phone in disbelief. Say that again, she demanded. Victoria paced behind her, her usual composure cracking. The background check company called this morning. They're refusing to provide any additional information about David Chen. Their exact words were that the file has been elevated to federal oversight. Federal oversight? Charles looked up from his computer, his face pale. What does that mean? It means, Margaret said, her voice tight with growing panic, that Emma's little boyfriend isn't what he appears to be. Victoria's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her face went white. It's Senator Blackwood's office. Margaret gestured for her to answer. Victoria put the call on speaker. Ms. Ashford, this is Senator Blackwood's chief of staff. The senator wanted to personally inform you that the Riverside Community Center zoning issue you brought to his attention has been resolved. Resolved how? Victoria's voice was sharp. The senator felt it best to withdraw the complaint after reviewing the broader implications of the case. What broader implications? There was a pause. Ma'am, I'm not at liberty to discuss the details, but the senator strongly advises that your family reconsider any ongoing conflicts with individuals associated with that organization. The line went dead. Charles set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. What have we done? Back at the motel, Emma was struggling to process the president's words while trying to understand the man standing beside her. David looked the same, but there was something different in how he carried himself now, as if he'd been holding back his true presence for 2 years. Mr. President, Emma said carefully, why are you here? Because David is one of my most trusted advisors, and when 43 families are threatened, it becomes a matter of national interest. Harrison's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. And because what happened to you last night was orchestrated by the same people trying to destroy these communities. Emma turned to David, pieces of understanding beginning to form a terrifying picture. You knew this would happen. I knew they were investigating me, David said quietly. I didn't know they would take it out on you. Take what out on me? Who are you really? President Harrison glanced at David, who nodded reluctantly. David Chun is my Deputy Chief of Staff for Community Relations, the president said. He's been working undercover for 2 years, documenting how wealthy families use bureaucratic warfare to eliminate social services that might reduce their political influence. Emma felt the world tilting beneath her feet. Undercover. The community center work is real, David said quickly. The programs, the families we help, my feelings for you, all of that is real. But my official job is coordinating a federal investigation into systematic oppression of vulnerable communities. You've been lying to me for 2 years. I've been protecting you from becoming a target. David's voice carried a desperation she'd never heard before. Emma, these people destroy anyone who threatens their power. I couldn't let them know you were connected to someone they saw as an enemy. But they found out anyway. They found out anyway, he confirmed. President Harrison stepped closer. Ms. Patterson, your adopted family has been under federal surveillance for 6 months. Their financial connections to several senators, their coordination with other wealthy families to eliminate social programs, their systematic harassment of community organizations, it's all documented. Emma's mind raced back through 2 years of memories, recontextualizing every moment. David's reluctance to meet her family, his knowledge about local politics, his mysterious phone calls, the way he always seemed to know exactly how to navigate bureaucratic obstacles. The night we met, she said slowly, you approached me about the literacy program. David's silence was answer enough. You knew who I was. You knew I was in Ashford. The investigation had identified you as a potential asset, he admitted. Someone with inside access to the family. Emma felt like she was drowning. So everything between us was part of your mission. No. The word exploded from David with fierce intensity. Emma, no. What happened between us was never part of any plan. I was supposed to cultivate you as an informant, but I fell in love with you instead. How convenient. It was the opposite of convenient. It was a complete disaster professionally. David turned to face her fully. I broke every protocol. I stopped gathering intelligence about your family because I couldn't stand the thought of hurting you. I've spent 2 years trying to find a way to protect you from what I knew was coming. President Harrison checked his watch. We need to move this conversation to a more secure location. There are some things Ms. Patterson needs to see. Emma looked between the 2 men, her heart hammering against her ribs. 2 years of love, trust, and growing dreams for the future, all built on a foundation of lies and federal surveillance. I need a minute, she said. Emma, David reached for her. Don't. She stepped back. Just don't. She walked toward the motel room, her mind spinning with questions that seemed to multiply faster than she could process them. Behind her, she heard David and the president speaking in low, urgent tones. As she reached for the door handle, her phone rang. Margaret Ashford's name appeared on the screen. Emma stared at the phone, realizing that answering it would change everything. The woman who had raised her, who had just disowned her 12 hours ago, was calling. But now Emma knew that Margaret wasn't just her adoptive mother. She was a target of federal investigation. And David wasn't just her boyfriend. He was a federal agent who had been investigating her family for 2 years while sharing her bed and her dreams. The phone continued ringing as Emma stood frozen between her old life and whatever terrifying new reality was emerging around her. Behind her, she heard David say to the president, "Sir, there's something else she needs to know before this goes any further." "What is it?" The Ashfords weren't randomly selected for this investigation. Emma's connection to the family isn't the coincidence we led her to believe. Emma's hand stilled on the door handle as President Harrison's voice carried clearly in the morning air. "You mean she doesn't know about her birth parents? She has no idea who they really were." The phone stopped ringing, but Emma no longer cared about Margaret's call. She turned around slowly, looking at David with new understanding. What about my birth parents? David's expression was filled with regret and something that looked almost like fear. Emma, your parents weren't just killed in a car accident. They were murdered. And the people who ordered their deaths are the same ones who took you in and raised you. Emma's legs gave out. She sank against the motel room door, the words echoing in her mind like a death knell. They were murdered. David moved toward her, but President Harrison held up a hand, stopping him. She needs to hear all of it before you try to comfort her. All of what? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. David's face was etched with pain. Emma, your father wasn't just a regular citizen. James Patterson was one of our most effective undercover agents, investigating the same kind of corruption network we're dealing with now. The world seemed to tilt sideways. My father was a federal agent? CIA, actually. Deep cover for 8 years. Your mother, Sarah, was his handler who became his wife. President Harrison's voice was gentle but relentless. They were close to exposing a network of wealthy families who were essentially buying senators and using government power to eliminate social services that threatened their control. Emma pressed her hands against her temples, trying to process information that rewrote everything she'd believed about herself. The Ashfords were part of the network your parents were investigating, David confirmed. When James and Sarah were killed, their research died with them. Or so everyone thought. But it didn't. President Harrison exchanged a look with David. Your father was paranoid about security. He hid copies of everything. Documentation of illegal campaign contributions, evidence of coordinated attacks on community programs, proof of systematic voter suppression efforts. Where? Emma's voice cracked. David knelt beside her, his presence both comforting and now terrifyingly unfamiliar. Emma, when you were 6 months old, your father gave you a locket. A family heirloom, your adoptive parents told you. Emma's hand flew to her throat, where a small silver locket had hung for as long as she could remember. Margaret had always said it was from her birth mother, the only thing Emma had been wearing when she'd been found after the accident. It's not just a locket, David said quietly. It's an encrypted storage device. Everything your parents died protecting is locked inside it. You're lying. But even as she said it, Emma was thinking about how Margaret had always insisted she wear the locket, how Charles had once studied it with unusual intensity, how Victoria had made strange comments about it over the years. The Ashfords didn't adopt you out of charity, President Harrison said. They adopted you to keep you close, to monitor whether you'd ever discover what your parents left behind. They've been waiting 23 years for you to either figure it out or for them to find a way to safely remove the locket without raising suspicions. Emma's mind raced through years of memories, seeing them through this horrifying new lens. Margaret's insistence that Emma never take the locket off. Charles's periodic questions about whether she remembered anything from before the adoption. Victoria's careful attention to Emma's relationships, her academic choices, her career plans. They've been watching me my entire life. And when you started dating me, David said, his voice heavy with guilt, they panicked. Because I'm the one person who would recognize what the locket really is. Emma looked at him with growing horror. You knew. When we met, you knew about the locket. David's silence confirmed her worst fears. That's why you approached me. Not for the investigation into their financial crimes. For what my parents left behind. Emma, you've been trying to get this locket from me for 2 years. She fumbled with the clasp, her hands shaking. Is that why you said you loved me? To get me to trust you enough to take it off? No. David's voice was raw with desperation. Emma, I swear to you that's not. Then why haven't you taken it? In 2 years, you never once suggested I remove it, never asked to examine it, never even commented on it. Emma's voice was rising with each word. If you're such a dedicated agent, why didn't you just steal it? The look on David's face told her everything she needed to know. Because you weren't supposed to fall in love with me, she whispered. You were supposed to get the locket and disappear. The mission changed when I got to know you, David said urgently. Emma, everything I feel for you is real. Yes, I was assigned to recover what your parents hid, but you've been lying to me every single day for 2 years. President Harrison stepped forward. Ms. Patterson, I understand how devastating this must be, but we need to focus on the immediate threat. The Ashfords know we're closing in. They're going to make a move. Emma's phone had been buzzing constantly. Now she looked at it and saw 17 missed calls from Margaret, 12 from Charles, and 23 from Victoria. They're panicking, she said numbly. They should be. Because what your parents died protecting is about to expose the biggest political corruption scandal in modern history. David reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Emma, 47 senators, 12 governors, and 3 Supreme Court justices have been taking money from this network. When that information goes public, it will reshape American politics. And I've been carrying it around my neck like a piece of jewelry. Her phone rang again. This time, it was a number she didn't recognize. Don't answer that, David said sharply. But Emma was beyond caring about his instructions. She answered the call. Emma, darling, thank goodness. Margaret's voice was syrupy sweet, but Emma could hear the underlying panic. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Has there? About last night. Your father and I were emotional. We said things we didn't mean. You're our daughter, Emma. You'll always be our daughter. Emma looked at David, seeing the truth she'd been blind to for 23 years. Am I Margaret? Or am I just the daughter of 2 people you had killed? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Margaret spoke again, her voice had lost all pretense of warmth. I don't know what lies that boy has been filling your head with, but you need to come home immediately. So you can finish what you started 23 years ago? Emma. Margaret's voice turned commanding, the tone she'd used throughout Emma's childhood to ensure obedience. Take off that locket and bring it home. Now. Emma's blood ran cold. After all these years, Margaret was finally showing her true hand. You've been waiting for me to take it off, haven't you? Waiting for the right moment to steal it without making me suspicious. That locket belongs to this family. This locket belonged to my real parents. The ones you murdered. David was making frantic gestures for Emma to hang up the phone, but she was beyond reason now. 23 years of emotional abuse, of trying to earn love from people who had killed her parents and raised her as a captive. You want this locket, Margaret? Come and get it. She hung up and immediately began working at the clasp with shaking fingers. Emma, don't. David grabbed her hands. If you remove it here, without proper security protocols. Don't touch me. She yanked away from him. Don't you dare touch me. The locket came free in her hands, and for the first time in 23 years, Emma felt its absence like a missing piece of her soul. She held the small silver heart up to the light, seeing it clearly for what it truly was. Not a memento of love, but evidence of murder. My entire life has been a lie, she said, her voice eerily calm. My parents are dead because of corruption you're investigating. I was raised by their killers. And the man I love has been using me for 2 years to get to this. She held up the locket, watching both David and President Harrison track its movement with intense focus. Tell me something, David. If I give this to you right now, what happens to me? David's hesitation was answer enough. I become a liability, don't I? Someone who knows too much about your operation. Emma, it's not like that. Then what is it like? Her voice was rising again. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I've been a target my entire life. First for the Ashfords, who needed to keep me close and monitored. Now for you, who needs what I carry. Tell me, David, when exactly in this equation do I get to be a person instead of an asset? President Harrison stepped forward. Ms. Patterson, your safety is our primary concern. My safety? Emma laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. My safety was compromised the day I was born to 2 people brave enough to fight corruption. My safety has never existed. She looked at the locket in her palm, then at David, whose face was stricken with grief and guilt. You want to know the worst part? I actually believed you loved me. I believed that someone could look at me and see something worth loving, not just something worth using. I do love you, David said desperately. Emma, I love you more than my mission, more than my career, more than my own life. That's why this is so complicated. Love doesn't lie for 2 years. Love protects the person it cherishes from dangers they never asked to face. Emma closed her fist around the locket, feeling its edges bite into her palm. And love certainly doesn't hand someone over to federal agents as soon as it gets what it needs. The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the air. President Harrison spoke into his earpiece, then turned to them with grim urgency. We have company. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. David's training kicked in immediately. Emma, we need to move you to secure. No. Emma stepped back from both of them. I'm done being moved around like a chess piece. The Ashfords are coming for you, President Harrison said. And they're not coming to talk. Emma looked at the locket in her hand, then at David, whose eyes held more love and regret than she'd ever seen in another human being. Then I guess it's time to end this. Before either man could stop her, Emma was running toward the approaching vehicles, the locket clutched in her fist and 23 years of lies burning in her chest like fire. Behind her, she heard David shout her name with the desperation of a man watching his entire world crumble. She didn't look back. Emma ran straight into her own destruction. 3 black SUVs formed a perfect semicircle around the motel parking lot, trapping her between the vehicles and the building where David and President Harrison stood frozen in horror. Margaret Ashford stepped out of the center vehicle, flanked by men whose suits couldn't quite hide the shape of concealed weapons. "Emma, sweetheart." Margaret's voice carried the false warmth she'd perfected over 23 years. "You look upset. I wonder why." Emma held up the locket, watching Margaret's eyes lock onto it with predatory intensity. "Maybe because I just learned my entire life has been built on the corpses of my real parents." Margaret's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Your real parents were naive idealists who didn't understand how the world actually works. They understood enough to document your crimes. They understood enough to get themselves killed." The casual admission hit Emma like a physical blow. For 23 years, she'd wondered about the accident that took her parents. Now Margaret was confirming it had been murder, spoken as casually as discussing the weather. "You ordered it. I authorized a necessary action to protect American stability." Margaret stepped closer, her voice taking on the lecturing tone Emma remembered from childhood. "Do you have any idea what would have happened if their little crusade had succeeded? Economic chaos. Political upheaval. Millions of jobs lost. Millions of people freed from your manipulation, you mean?" Margaret laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Emma, darling, you've always been so wonderfully naive. Do you think democracy actually works? Do you think average people are capable of making complex decisions about economics and foreign policy?" Charles emerged from another vehicle, his expression grim. "People like us provide stability, Emma. We make the difficult choices so others don't have to. Choices like murdering federal agents who threaten your power. Choices like protecting a system that's kept America prosperous for decades." Charles's voice carried the same patronizing tone he'd used whenever Emma had questioned their values. "Your birth parents would have destroyed everything we've built." Emma felt sick understanding washing over her. These weren't grieving adoptive parents who'd made terrible choices. These were calculating predators who'd spent 23 years raising the daughter of their victims. "You enjoyed it, didn't you? Raising me. Watching me try so hard to earn love from the people who killed my family." Victoria stepped out of the third vehicle, and her expression was pure malice. "It was fascinating, actually. Watching you bend yourself into impossible shapes, trying to please us. Watching you apologize for existing." "Victoria." Emma stared at her adoptive sister, seeing her clearly for the first time. "You knew from the beginning." "I've known since I was 7 years old." Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. "Do you remember when you had nightmares about car crashes? When you used to wake up screaming about people in the dark? Mom and Dad told you it was just your imagination, but I knew better." Emma's blood turned to ice. "You knew I was remembering. Fragments. Pieces. You were only 6 months old when it happened, but trauma leaves marks." Victoria stepped closer. "I used to watch you sleep, wondering if you'd ever remember enough to become dangerous." "That's enough." David's voice cut through the family reunion like a blade. He'd positioned himself between Emma and the SUVs, President Harrison beside him with a full Secret Service detail. Margaret barely glanced at him. "Mr. Chin. Or should I say, Agent Chin? You've caused us considerable trouble. You've caused yourselves trouble by being criminals. We've provided necessary leadership in a world too complex for simple minds to understand." Margaret's attention returned to Emma. "Now, darling, you're going to give me that locket, and we're going to go home and forget this unpleasant misunderstanding." Emma looked at the small silver heart in her palm. 23 years she'd worn it, thinking it was her only connection to parents who'd loved her. Now she understood it was evidence that could destroy the people who'd raised her. "What happens if I give this to you?" Margaret's smile was empty. "You get to live. And if I don't, you join your parents." The threat was delivered with such casual certainty that Emma felt her knees weaken. These people had killed before, and they would kill again without hesitation. "Emma, don't listen to them." David's voice was urgent, desperate. "You have protection now. The President of the United States is standing right here." Margaret laughed. "Oh, David. You really think that matters? Do you know how many presidents we've influenced over the years? How many senators owe their careers to our contributions? How many judges rule in our favor because of strategic campaign donations? President Harrison stepped forward, his voice carrying absolute authority. Mrs. Ashford, you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and treason against the United States. Am I? Margaret's smile widened. And which court exactly do you plan to try me in? Judge Morrison in the Southern District? He owes his appointment to our recommendation. Judge Chin in the appeals court? Her campaign was funded by our network. Or perhaps you'd prefer the Supreme Court, where 3 justices have been receiving our financial support for years. Emma watched the color drain from President Harrison's face as the full scope of the corruption became clear. You can't control the entire judicial system, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. Can't we? Charles pulled out his phone, showing them a text message thread. Senator Blackwood has already withdrawn the investigation into our community center harassment. Senator Walsh is preparing to block any federal charges against our family. And Senator Torres, your biggest supporter, Mr. President, is about to call for your impeachment unless you drop this entire matter. Emma felt the walls closing in around them. The corruption wasn't just widespread, it was complete. The very system that was supposed to protect justice had been purchased and controlled. Emma, Margaret said gently, extending her hand. Give me the locket, and we can all go back to our normal lives. Our normal lives? Emma's voice cracked. You mean the life where I spend forever trying to earn love from my parents' murderers? You mean the life where you're safe, well-educated, and well-provided for instead of dead in a ditch beside your idealistic parents? The cruelty of the words hit Emma like physical blows. Margaret was right about one thing. If Emma's parents had succeeded in their investigation, she never would have survived to adulthood. The Ashfords would have killed her along with James and Sarah Patterson. You kept me alive as insurance, Emma realized, in case their evidence ever surfaced. We kept you alive because we're not monsters, Charles said. We gave you everything, education, opportunities, a family. You gave me trauma disguised as love. We gave you life disguised as family loyalty. Margaret's patience was wearing thin. Now give me that locket before I decide that generosity was a mistake. Emma looked at David, whose face was etched with helpless rage. He was surrounded by Secret Service agents, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Even if they could arrest the Ashfords, the corrupted judicial system would ensure no consequences. David, she said quietly, if I give them this locket, what happens to all those families at the community center? Emma, don't. What happens to them? David's silence told her everything. Without the evidence in the locket, the corruption network would continue. The community centers would close. Vulnerable families would lose their support systems. And people like the Ashfords would keep buying senators and judges until democracy existed only as a facade. 43 families, Emma whispered. 47 centers across the country, David confirmed reluctantly. Thousands of families. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible choice. Give up the locket and save her own life while condemning thousands of innocent people to continued oppression. Or refuse to surrender it and die for the chance that someone else might eventually succeed where her parents had failed. There's a third option, Victoria said, reading Emma's expression with disturbing accuracy. You could come home with us willingly. Forget about David, forget about this investigation, and resume your place in our family. We'll even pay for medical school. In exchange for what? Complete silence. Forever. Victoria's smile was predatory. You become our perfect daughter again. Grateful, obedient, and quiet about things that don't concern you. Emma stared at her adoptive sister, understanding the full scope of the trap. Not just death or betrayal of innocent people, but a third option that was somehow worse than both. Living as a willing accomplice to her parents' murderers. Think about it, Emma, Margaret said softly. You could have everything you've ever wanted. Our love, our approval, our support. All you have to do is choose family loyalty over strangers who mean nothing to you. Emma looked at David, whose eyes held a desperation that made her heart break. He loved her. She could see that now, despite all the lies and manipulation. But love wasn't enough to overcome the reality of their situation. The corruption was too deep. The system was too broken. And she was just one person carrying the evidence that dozens of powerful people would kill to suppress. I need a minute, Emma said. You have 30 seconds, Margaret replied. Emma walked a few steps away, still holding the locket, and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number she hadn't called in years. Hello? Jessica? It's Emma. Listen carefully. I need you to go to my apartment. You still have the spare key, right? In my bedroom, there's a box under my bed labeled Dad's papers. Take it to the FBI field office downtown and tell them it's connected to the Patterson investigation. Emma, what's going on? You sound. Just do it. Please. And Jess, if something happens to me, know that I finally figured out who I really am. She hung up before Jessica could respond and turned back to face her family of murderers and the man who'd lied to her for 2 years out of love. I've made my choice, Emma said. Margaret smiled triumphantly. I knew you'd see reason. Emma opened her fist, revealing the locket, then threw it as hard as she could toward the busy street beyond the parking lot. The small silver heart arced through the air, glinting in the sunlight, before disappearing into traffic with a sound like breaking glass. No! Margaret's scream was inhuman, and Emma smiled for the first time since her world had collapsed, because she'd finally found a way to choose love over fear, even if it killed her. The silence that followed Emma's defiant act stretched like a held breath before an explosion. Margaret Ashford's face had transformed into something inhuman, her carefully maintained facade cracking to reveal the monster underneath. You stupid, ungrateful child. Margaret's voice was a whisper that carried more menace than any scream. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Emma stood straighter than she had in 23 years. I've just ensured that thousands of families won't lose their support systems because you want to play puppet master with democracy. You've just signed your death warrant. Then at least I'll die as my parents' daughter instead of your trained pet. David stepped forward, his entire body radiating protective fury. If you touch her, You'll what? Charles pulled a gun from his jacket, the movement so casual it was terrifying. Call for backup? Your Secret Service friends are outnumbered 3-1. File a report? Half the FBI leadership answers to our network. President Harrison spoke into his earpiece, but his expression grew increasingly grim as he received responses. The Justice Department has just suspended our investigation, pending procedural review. The Attorney General is citing concerns about federal overreach. Emma felt a strange calm settling over her as she watched the walls close in. For the first time in her life, she'd acted purely on her own moral convictions instead of trying to please someone else. It felt like freedom, even in the face of death. The locket's evidence is useless now anyway, Victoria said, pulling out her own weapon. Destroyed in traffic, contaminated, inadmissible in any court. You've accomplished nothing except ensuring we have to clean up loose ends. Have I? Emma's smile was serene. David, what did you say about my father being paranoid about security? David's eyes widened with sudden understanding. He had copies of everything. Multiple copies, Emma confirmed. The locket was just one storage device. Did you really think a seasoned CIA agent would keep all his evidence in a single location? Margaret's gun appeared so quickly Emma barely saw the movement. Where are the other copies? Scattered across the country in safety deposit boxes, with lawyers, in the hands of trusted friends. Emma was lying smoothly now, but her voice carried complete conviction. My father was methodical about insurance. You're bluffing. Am I? Jessica's probably already delivering one set of documents to the FBI. My college roommate, who happens to be a journalism major with connections at the Washington Post. Emma's smile widened. You remember Jessica, don't you, Victoria? You met her at my graduation yesterday. Victoria's face went pale. You didn't. I did. Along with copies sent to investigative journalists in 5 different cities. Time to be opened if I don't check in every 72 hours. Emma was building the lie as she spoke, but the panicked expressions on the Ashfords' faces told her it was working. My father taught me well, even from beyond the grave. Charles raised his gun toward Emma, but David moved faster than seemed humanly possible, tackling him to the ground. The weapon skittered across the asphalt as the two men fought with desperate intensity. Stop! Margaret screamed, swinging her gun toward David. I'll kill him. No, you won't. Emma's voice carried absolute certainty. Because if David dies, every copy of my father's evidence gets released immediately. Kill me, and the same thing happens. You're trapped, Margaret. For the first time in your miserable life, you don't control the outcome. President Harrison was speaking rapidly into his earpiece, coordinating with someone. Copy that. Yes, we have confirmation. Multiple locations. Margaret spun toward him. Confirmation of what? Ms. Patterson wasn't bluffing about the evidence. Harrison's voice carried grim satisfaction. FBI teams are executing simultaneous raids on 17 locations connected to your network. Safety deposit boxes, law offices, private residences. Emma blinked in surprise. She had been bluffing, but apparently reality was catching up to her fiction. David rolled away from Charles, breathing hard. Emma, your phone call to Jessica triggered an automated protocol your father established. Every time his daughter's name appeared in connection with the keywords Patterson investigation, dormant instructions activated. What instructions? Dead man switches at multiple locations. Your father programmed them to activate if you were ever threatened. David's voice was filled with awe and grief. He's been protecting you for 23 years, even from the grave. Margaret let out a sound like a wounded animal. That's impossible. We monitored everything. You monitored the obvious things, Emma said, understanding flooding through her. But my father was CIA. He knew how to hide things from people exactly like you. Victoria raised her gun toward Emma with shaking hands. I don't care about evidence or investigations. I care about making you pay for destroying our family. Your family was built on murder and corruption. I didn't destroy it. I revealed what it really was. Emma, David's warning came too late. Victoria's finger tightened on the trigger, but the shot that rang out didn't come from her weapon. She crumpled to the ground, clutching her shoulder, as Secret Service snipers revealed their positions on nearby rooftops. Drop your weapons. The command echoed from multiple directions as agents poured into the parking lot. Margaret looked around wildly, realizing her empire was crumbling in real time. This isn't over. You have no idea how deep this goes, how many people. Actually, we do. President Harrison approached her with handcuffs. Thanks to your adopted daughter's courage, we know exactly how deep it goes. Charles made one last desperate lunge for his fallen weapon, but Emma stepped forward and kicked it away. The man who had helped murder her parents and then raised her as his own daughter was now crawling in the dirt at her feet. Why? Emma asked quietly. Why take me in at all? Why not just kill me with them? Charles looked up at her, and for a moment she saw something that might have been genuine regret. Because you were 6 months old, and even monsters have limits. No, Emma said, understanding finally clicking into place. Because you needed a way to monitor whether any evidence had been left behind. Raising me gave you 23 years to study me, to watch for signs that I might remember something or inherit something dangerous. Margaret's laugh was bitter as the Secret Service agents restrained her. Clever girl. Too clever for your own good, just like your parents. My parents were heroes. Your parents were naive idealists who thought they could change a system that's been working perfectly for decades. Emma watched as the people who had controlled her entire life were led away in handcuffs. Margaret maintained her dignity even in defeat, her head held high as if she were merely inconvenienced rather than arrested for murder and treason. Victoria was the last to be taken, blood seeping through her fingers as she clutched her wounded shoulder. As she passed Emma, she leaned close enough to whisper, You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've just unleashed. The network is bigger than us, deeper than us. You've just made yourself a target for the rest of your life. Then I'll spend the rest of my life fighting back, Emma replied. Just like my parents did. As the parking lot finally cleared of vehicles and agents, Emma found herself alone with David for the first time since her world had exploded. They stood several feet apart, the distance feeling like an ocean. So, she said quietly, where do we go from here? David's expression was filled with love and regret and hope all tangled together. That depends on whether you can ever forgive me for lying to you. You protected me. I used you, even if I fell in love with you in the process. Emma studied his face, seeing the man she'd fallen in love with and the federal agent who'd been investigating her family, understanding that both versions were equally real. David, she said slowly, ask me again. Ask you what? Ask me to take off the locket. David's breath caught. Emma, ask me. Why? Emma smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. Because this time, if I say yes, it will be because I choose to. Not because I'm being manipulated or threatened or lied to. Because I'm finally free to make my own choices about who to trust with my heart. David took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Emma Catherine Patterson, would you trust me with your whole truth? Not just the locket, not just the evidence, but everything you are. Emma reached up and touched her throat, where the locket had hung for 23 years. Its absence felt strange, but not empty. For the first time, she felt complete without needing something external to define her. David Chun, she said, taking her own step forward. "I'd trust you with my life. But more importantly, I'd trust you with my choice to build a new life, on my own terms, with someone who sees me as more than just an asset or a target or a project." "And what do you see when you look at me?" Emma considered the question seriously. "I see someone who started with a mission and ended up with a calling. Someone who lied to protect me from a truth I wasn't ready for, and then told me the truth when I was strong enough to handle it. And," Emma's smile was radiant, "and I see the man I'm going to marry, if he ever gets around to asking properly." David's laugh was part relief, part joy, part disbelief. "Emma, we've been dating for 2 years based on a lie. You just found out your entire family history is fabricated, and we're both probably going to be in federal protection for the foreseeable future." "I know. And you still want to marry me?" Emma reached for his hands, feeling the rightness of the choice in her bones. "David, I've spent 23 years trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. You've given me real love even when you thought it might compromise your mission. Yes, I want to marry you. I want to build something true with you." David pulled her close, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Emma felt safe. But as they held each other in the aftermath of destruction, neither of them noticed the unmarked van parked across the street, or the telephoto lens capturing their embrace. Victoria's warning echoed in the wind. The network was bigger than the Ashfords, and Emma had just made herself a target for life. The war was just beginning. The unmarked van exploded in a ball of fire that shattered windows 3 blocks away. Emma and David hit the ground as debris rained around them. But before the smoke had even cleared, Emma's phone was ringing with a ringtone she'd never heard before. Her father's voice, recorded 23 years ago. "If you're hearing this, Emma, it means the protocols have fully activated. It's time to finish what your mother and I started." David stared at the phone in Emma's shaking hands. "That's impossible. Your father's been dead for 23 years, 4 months, and 17 days, Emma whispered, somehow knowing the exact count. "But he's been planning this moment for longer than that." President Harrison approached them, but his expression was different now. Less presidential authority, more personal relief. "Emma, there's something you need to understand about what just happened. The van was monitoring you for the shadow network Victoria warned you about. It's been eliminated by a security system your father designed to protect you." Harrison paused, studying her face. "A system that's been active and evolving for over 2 decades. Emma felt reality shifting around her again, but this time it felt like pieces clicking into place rather than her world falling apart. "What kind of system?" David pulled out his phone, showing her a real-time map of the United States. Red dots were appearing and disappearing across the country in rapid succession. "Emma, look at this." "What am I looking at?" "Simultaneous raids happening right now. Not just on the Ashford network, but on 17 different corruption cells across the country." David's voice was filled with awe. "All triggered by your phone call to Jessica this morning." "That's impossible. I was improvising." President Harrison shook his head. "You weren't improvising, Emma. You were following patterns your father embedded in your subconscious through the stories he told you as a baby." Emma's mind flashed back to fragments of memory she'd always dismissed as dreams. Her father's voice telling her elaborate bedtime stories about brave knights and hidden kingdoms, about secret codes and sleeping guardians who would wake when their kingdom needed them most. "The lullabies," she whispered. "Weren't lullabies," Harrison confirmed. "They were programming. Not brainwashing guidance. Your father knew that if you ever needed to activate his network, you'd instinctively know how to do it." Emma's phone rang again, but this time it was a live call. A woman's voice, warm but unfamiliar. "Emma? This is Agent Sarah Chun, FBI Counterintelligence. I've been waiting 23 years to make this call." "Sarah Chun." Emma looked at David. "Any relation?" David's face had gone completely white. "Mom." The phone crackled with emotion. "Hello, son. It's time you both knew the truth." Emma sank onto the motel steps, her legs no longer capable of supporting her. "David's mother is supposed to be dead." "David's mother has been coordinating the largest counter-corruption operation in American history," Agent Chin replied. "James Patterson wasn't just investigating one network, Emma. He was building a counter-network. People like us, embedded throughout the system, waiting for the day when his daughter was old enough and strong enough to flip the switch." David sat down heavily beside Emma. "You've been alive this entire time? I've been protecting you both this entire time." "David, your assignment to investigate Emma wasn't random. It was the final phase of your father's plan coming together. My father, James Patterson, was David's handler, Emma. When James and his wife were murdered, David was just a child, but he was already part of the network. We raised him to be exactly where he needed to be when you needed him most. Emma stared at David, seeing him completely differently yet again. You're not just a federal agent who happened to be assigned to my case. I'm the son of your father's closest friend, raised specifically to protect you and help you when this day came. David's voice was barely audible. Emma, I've loved you my entire life, even before I met you. My parents used to tell me stories about James Patterson's brilliant daughter, who would one day help save democracy. The phone crackled again as Agent Chen continued. Emma, every choice you've made today has activated dormant cells across the country. Your decision to throw away the locket triggered financial investigations in 12 states. Your call to Jessica activated journalist networks in 27 cities. Your confrontation with the Ashfords gave our teams the evidence they needed to move against judges and senators simultaneously. President Harrison was monitoring his own communications, his expression growing more amazed by the minute. Senator Blackwood just resigned. Senator Walsh is under arrest. Judge Morrison is being removed from the bench as we speak. How many people are part of this? Emma asked. Everyone who ever believed democracy was worth fighting for, Agent Chen replied. Teachers who documented voting irregularities, journalists who kept investigating when their stories were killed, community organizers who refused to be silenced, federal agents who stayed honest when it would have been easier to look the other way. Emma felt tears streaming down her face as the scope of her father's vision became clear. He built an entire shadow government of good people. He built hope, David said quietly, and he made you the key that would unlock it. Emma's phone buzzed with text messages flooding in from numbers she didn't recognize. Sacramento cell activated. Governor Williams arrested. Phoenix team moving. 3 judges detained. Miami network engaged. Mayor's corruption ring exposed. Boston unit successful. Senate candidate connections severed. How long has this been going on? Emma whispered. Agent Chen's voice was proud and grief-stricken at the same time. Your father started building this network when you were born. Every person he recruited was someone who'd been fighting the same corruption he was investigating. He connected them, coordinated them, and then went underground to protect them all. Until I was old enough to activate them. Until you were strong enough to carry the weight of being their symbol. David took her hand. Emma, you're not just carrying evidence of corruption. You're the living proof that their system can't destroy justice, because justice finds a way to regenerate itself. President Harrison approached them with his phone in hand. Emma, I need you to know something about my role in this. Emma looked up at him, realizing there had to be another revelation coming. I'm not just the president who happened to be in office when this network activated, he said gently. I'm the president your father helped put in office. 23 years ago, James Patterson didn't just investigate corruption. He identified the people who could be trusted to rebuild the system when the time came. You've been planning this presidency for over 2 decades. I've been preparing for the day when a young woman named Emma Patterson would call on the network her father built and give us the chance to take our country back. Emma stood up slowly, feeling the weight of a destiny she'd never asked for settling around her shoulders. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like inheritance, not money or property, but purpose. What happens now? David smiled at her, and she could see her father's friend's son in his face, the boy who'd been raised on stories about her, who'd fallen in love with her twice. Once as an idea, once as a person. Now you get to choose what America looks like when it's run by people who actually care about democracy. Emma's phone rang one more time. This time, the caller ID simply said home. She answered it, knowing somehow that it wasn't the Ashford estate calling. Emma. The voice was impossible, but she recognized it instantly from dreams and fragments of memory. It's Dad. Dad. Emma's voice broke on the word. Hello, sweetheart. I know this is going to be hard to understand, but your mother and I have been in deep cover for 23 years, waiting for this day. You're alive? We're alive, we're safe, and we're so proud of the woman you've become. James Patterson's voice was warm with love and pride. We had to let you think we were dead to protect you and the network, but Emma, you've just saved democracy itself. Emma sank to her knees in the motel parking lot, overwhelmed by revelations that kept reshaping reality. David knelt beside her, his arm around her shoulders as she processed the impossible. Where are you? About 10 minutes away. We've been close by your whole life, making sure you were safe, making sure the network stayed hidden until you were ready to lead it. Emma looked around the parking lot where her old life had ended just hours ago. Secret Service agents were maintaining a perimeter, but now she understood they weren't just protecting the president. They were protecting the center of the largest counter-corruption operation in history. "Dad," she whispered, "I don't know how to be a leader." "Sweetheart, you've been leading all your life. Every time you stood up to the Ashfords' cruelty, every time you chose kindness over power, every time you put others' needs before your own, you were preparing for this moment." David squeezed her hand. "Emma, 47 community centers stayed open today because of your courage. 17 corruption networks are being dismantled because you chose truth over safety. Thousands of families will have better lives because you refused to be silenced." Emma stood up, feeling something shift inside her. Not just acceptance of her destiny, but embrace of it. For 23 years, she'd been trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. Now she understood that love had been surrounding her all along, in the form of a network of people willing to sacrifice everything to build a better world. "When do I meet them?" she asked. "My parents." "Right now," said a voice behind her. Emma turned to see a couple approaching across the parking lot, older than the young parents in her photograph, marked by years of hidden struggle, but unmistakably the people who'd given her life and then spent 23 years preparing her to use it to save others. Sarah Patterson reached her first, pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home after a lifetime of exile. James Patterson wrapped both women in his arms, and for the first time since she was 6 months old, Emma was held by people who'd loved her completely from the moment she drew breath. "We're so sorry," Sarah whispered into Emma's hair. "We're so sorry we had to let you grow up thinking you were alone." "I wasn't alone," Emma replied, looking at David over her mother's shoulder. "You made sure I found family when I needed it most." As the Patterson family reunion continued in the motel parking lot, neither Emma nor David noticed the small crowd of people gathering at the perimeter. Community center workers, teachers, social workers, federal agents, journalists, and ordinary citizens who'd been part of the network for years, all coming to witness the moment when democracy began to heal itself. The daughter of murdered idealists had become the leader of a revolution built on hope instead of hatred, love instead of power, and the radical idea that government should serve people instead of the other way around. But the greatest victory wasn't political, it was personal. Emma Patterson had finally found her real family, and discovered that it included everyone who'd ever refused to give up on the possibility of justice. The war was over. The healing could begin. 1 year later, Emma Patterson stood in the same marble foyer where Margaret Ashford had disowned her, but everything had changed. The crystal chandelier still hung overhead, but now it illuminated a very different kind of gathering. "Are you ready for this?" David asked, adjusting his tie nervously. Emma smiled, feeling none of the anxiety that would have consumed her a year ago. "I've been ready my entire life. I just didn't know it yet." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the same ones she'd stared through as a child, dreaming of belonging somewhere, Emma could see the crowd gathering on the front lawn. Community center families, former federal agents, journalists who'd helped expose the corruption, and ordinary citizens who'd been part of her father's network for decades. Today, the Ashford estate was being converted into the Patterson Institute for Democratic Renewal, a training center for community organizers and a coordination hub for ongoing anti-corruption efforts. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The house built with dirty money would now be used to clean up American politics. "5 minutes, Emma," her mother called from the next room, but her voice carried joy instead of the tension that had marked their reunion. Sarah Patterson had spent the past year helping Emma adjust to having living parents again, a process more complicated than either of them had anticipated. Emma walked to the window where she'd stood so many times as a child, but now instead of feeling like an outsider looking in, she felt like someone who'd finally found her place in the world. The transformation hadn't been easy. Learning to trust her parents after believing them dead, rebuilding her relationship with David on a foundation of complete honesty, and stepping into a leadership role she'd never asked for. But it had been worth it. "Emma." David appeared beside her, concern flickering in his eyes. "You're thinking too hard. I can see the wheels turning. Just remembering." She leaned into his warmth, still amazed that she could touch him without wondering if he was hiding something from her. "This time last year, I was packing my life into 2 suitcases, thinking I'd lost everything. And now, Emma gestured toward the lawn, where children from the Riverside Community Center were playing games while their parents mingled with some of the most powerful people in reformed American politics. Now I understand that losing everything was the only way to find what actually mattered. President Harrison appeared in the doorway, no longer the intimidating authority figure from that terrifying day at the motel, but a family friend who'd shared Sunday dinners with the Pattersons for the past year. Ready to make your speech, Emma? She nodded, then paused. James, can I ask you something I've been wondering about? Of course. That first day when you showed up at the motel, were you really surprised by what the Ashfords had done, or was it all planned? Harrison's smile was rueful. Your father's network was designed to activate if you were ever threatened, but we never imagined the Ashfords would be cruel enough to disown you publicly. That was their miscalculation. It gave us the perfect opportunity to move against them with full legal justification. So my heartbreak was coincidentally useful timing? Your heartbreak was the catalyst that finally gave us the opening we'd been waiting for. David squeezed her hand. But Emma, none of us anticipated how strong you'd be in that moment. The way you handled everything, throwing away the locket, confronting them directly, activating the network, that was all you. Emma felt the familiar flutter of pride mixed with grief that had become her emotional baseline over the past year. Pride in what they'd accomplished, grief for the innocence she'd lost in learning the truth about her life. The criminal trials had been swift and comprehensive. Margaret and Charles Ashford were serving life sentences for conspiracy to commit murder and treason. Victoria had received 25 years for her role in the intimidation campaigns. 43 senators, 12 governors, and 4 federal judges had been removed from office or resigned in disgrace. But the real victory wasn't in the punishments. It was in what had been built to replace the corruption. Emma, it's time, her father said, joining the group by the window. James Patterson looked older than his years, marked by decades of underground work, but his eyes held the same fierce determination Emma saw in her own mirror each morning. As they walked toward the front door, Emma caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the anxious girl who'd stood in this same spot a year ago, desperately trying to earn love from people who'd never intended to give it. This Emma stood straight, met the world's gaze directly, and wore confidence like armor forged in the fires of truth. The crowd on the lawn erupted in applause as Emma stepped onto the front porch. She could see Maria Santos from the Riverside Community Center in the front row, holding her 2-year-old son who would grow up in a world where community programs were protected rather than targeted. Behind her stood Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the investigative journalist who'd broken the story that brought down the judicial corruption network. But it was the small group of teenagers near the back that made Emma's throat tight with emotion. Kids from community centers across the country, many of whom had written her letters over the past year thanking her for ensuring their safe spaces would remain open. Thank you all for being here today, Emma began, her voice carrying clearly across the lawn without need for amplification. A year ago, I stood in this house as someone who'd spent her entire life trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. Today, I stand here surrounded by people who taught me that love isn't something you earn. It's something you build together. She paused, looking at David, whose proposal 6 months ago had been delivered not with grand gestures, but with quiet certainty in their shared future. The Patterson Institute isn't just a training center or a coordination hub. It's proof that democracy works when it's practiced by people who actually believe in it. When it's built by communities working together instead of imposed by powerful people working in isolation. Emma's voice grew stronger as she found her rhythm. My parents' original investigation exposed corruption in our system. But the network they built shows us something more important. That the system can be healed by ordinary people doing extraordinary things in their own communities. She gestured toward the teenagers in the crowd. The real leaders of this movement aren't the adults on this stage. They're the young people who refuse to accept that poverty, injustice, and corruption are inevitable. They're the community organizers who show up every day to make their neighborhoods better. They're the teachers and social workers and volunteers who believe that every person deserves dignity and opportunity. The applause was sustained and heartfelt, but Emma wasn't finished. But I want to be honest with you about something. The work isn't done. Corruption wasn't eliminated by our victories. It was disrupted. There are still people in positions of power who believe that democracy is a game they can win through money and influence. There are still families who will go to bed hungry tonight in the richest country in human history. There are still children who will attend schools that have been deliberately underfunded to maintain someone else's advantage. Emma's voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. The difference is that now we know we're not alone in fighting these problems. We know that there are thousands of people working together, coordinating efforts, sharing resources, and refusing to give up on the possibility of justice. David stepped forward, and Emma felt the familiar warmth of his presence beside her. A year of complete honesty had only deepened their connection, proving that love built on truth was infinitely stronger than love built on protection from truth. "In 6 months, David and I will be married," Emma announced, smiling at the cheer that rose from the crowd. "Not because we found our happy ending, but because we found our shared beginning. The beginning of a life spent building the kind of world where no child has to grow up feeling unwanted, where no family has to choose between dignity and survival, where no community has to fight alone against systems designed to exploit them." Emma looked out over the faces in the crowd, people who'd risked their careers, their safety, and their lives to protect democracy, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality for vulnerable people. The Patterson Institute will train organizers, coordinate campaigns, and support communities fighting for justice. But its real purpose is to remind us all that democracy isn't something that happens to us. It's something we create together, every single day, through the choices we make about how to treat each other. As the formal ceremony concluded and people began moving toward the reception tables set up under the trees, Emma found herself standing with her parents in the shade of the old oak tree, where she'd spent countless childhood hours hiding from the Ashfords' disapproval. "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, the question carrying the weight of a mother's year-long worry about whether they'd made the right choices for their daughter. Emma considered the question seriously. Happiness felt too simple a word for what she experienced now. There was joy, yes, but also the constant awareness of how much work remained. There was love, but also the knowledge that loving people meant fighting for their right to thrive. There was peace, but the kind that came from purposeful action rather than comfortable passivity. "I'm complete," she said finally. "For the first time in my life, I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do, with people who see me clearly and love me anyway." James Patterson smiled, and Emma could see traces of the young idealist who'd believed democracy was worth dying for. "That's all your mother and I ever wanted for you. Not happiness as an end in itself, but the tools to build a meaningful life." As the afternoon wore on, Emma found herself in conversation after conversation with people whose lives had been touched by the network's work. But it was her conversation with 15-year-old Marcus Williams from the Detroit Center that stayed with her longest. "Ms. Patterson," he said shyly, approaching her near the dessert table, "I wanted to thank you for what you did." "What did I do for you, Marcus?" "You made it so my little sister has somewhere safe to go after school. You made it so my mom could get job training while we were in childcare. You made it so my neighborhood didn't lose the only place where kids could get help with homework and adults could get help with citizenship classes." Emma knelt down to his eye level, remembering what it felt like to be a young person in need of adult attention and care. "Marcus, I didn't do that. Your community did that. I just helped remove some obstacles that were in your way. But you could have chosen to stay safe. Nobody would have blamed you for giving them what they wanted and protecting yourself." The wisdom in his words struck Emma with unexpected force. "Marcus, can I tell you something?" He nodded eagerly. "Safety that comes from letting bad people hurt good people isn't really safety. It's just delayed danger. The only real safety comes from building a world where everyone is protected, not just the people with enough money and power to protect themselves." Marcus smiled, and Emma could see the future community leader growing behind his eyes. "Is that what you're going to teach people here? That's what we're going to learn together." As the sun began to set over the estate that had once symbolized everything wrong with American power, Emma stood on the front porch with David, watching families pack up their children and head home to communities that were stronger and safer because ordinary people had refused to accept that corruption was inevitable. "Any regrets?" David asked, slipping his arm around her waist. Emma leaned against him, thinking about the question seriously. "I regret that it took so long. I regret that people suffered while we were building the courage to act. I regret that my parents had to sacrifice 23 years of open relationship with me to protect the larger mission. But I don't regret any of the choices we made once we understood what was at stake." Emma smiled, feeling the contentment that came from knowing her life had purpose beyond her own comfort. "And I don't regret loving someone who was brave enough to tell me the truth even when it was dangerous." David kissed her temple. I love you, Emma Patterson. Not because you saved democracy, although that was pretty impressive, but because you taught me that real courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to do the right thing even when you're terrified. As the last guests departed and the cleanup crew began their work, Emma took one final walk through the house that had shaped her childhood in all the wrong ways and would now help shape other children's futures in all the right ways. In the study where Charles Ashford had once calculated political influence like stock portfolios, there were now bookshelves filled with resources on community organizing and democratic participation. In the dining room where Margaret had hosted strategy sessions with corrupt officials, there would soon be training seminars for grassroots leaders from across the country. The transformation was complete, but Emma understood that completion wasn't the same as conclusion. The Patterson Institute would need constant work, constant vigilance, constant renewal of purpose. Democracy, she'd learned, wasn't a destination but a practice, something that had to be chosen fresh every day by people who believed it was worth the effort. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Williams. Ms. Patterson, when I grow up, I want to help run programs like yours. What should I study? Emma smiled as she typed back. Study everything that helps you understand how people can work together to solve problems. But most importantly, never stop believing that change is possible when ordinary people refuse to stay silent about injustice. His response came immediately. I won't. I promise. As Emma turned off the lights in her childhood home for the last time as a private residence, she felt her parents' presence beside her. Not the ghosts of murdered idealists, but the living legacy of people who'd believed that love was stronger than fear, that truth was more powerful than lies, and that democracy could survive anything as long as there were people willing to fight for it. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Training organizers, coordinating campaigns, supporting communities, and teaching young people like Marcus that they had the power to build the world they wanted to live in. But tonight, Emma Patterson stood in the doorway of her transformed past, hand in hand with the man who'd helped her discover her true future, surrounded by the family she'd thought she'd lost and the community she'd helped build, knowing that she was exactly where she belonged. The girl who'd once packed her life into 2 suitcases, believing she had nothing left to lose, had become the woman who'd learned that losing everything false was the only way to find everything true. And in finding herself, she'd helped an entire country find its way back to its founding promise, that government should serve people, not the other way around. The revolution was complete. The evolution had just begun. What did this story teach you about the power of truth over comfort, the courage required for real love, and the possibility that ordinary people can change the world when they refuse to accept that injustice is inevitable? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world.